This may come as a surprise, but leadership is not a one-size-fits-all endeavor. Most leaders, whether they realize it or not, have a default style. They lead the way they were led, or they lean into what feels more comfortable or natural for them. But your team doesn't need a one-size-fits-all approach. They need leadership that adapts, because what worked yesterday might not work today. Needs shift, people grow, and your leadership needs to adapt with them. I'm Eric Pfeiffer, and in this episode, Don and I are going to help you tailor your leadership style with precision so that your people don't just feel led, they feel seen, they feel supported, and they feel empowered to grow. Let's do it.
That's right. And so in our last episode, we looked at the development square, which is the process that every person goes through to learn anything. We kind of looked at the idea that this development square gives us an understanding of our own learning process and what we can learn and glean from each phase of the development square. But it also gives us permission to not be an expert at everything. It gives us permission to be in D2, in the pit, to feel underwater. It gives us permission to be in D1 with that excited, I'm new to this energy, I can't wait to lean in. So this episode, we are going to layer on top of the development square, the leadership square. So if you haven't listened to the development square episode, I encourage you to pause this, go back, listen to that, and then return to us, because that's going to be really foundational for some of the things that we talk about today. So what we have seen time and again, Eric, is that leaders really, really feel comfortable with one certain style. And that's not a bad thing. That is just a truth of life, that when we find something that works, we want to apply it as much as possible, because our brains love to save the energy of having to learn new things.
That's right.
However, what we learned last episode about the development square says that every step on our developmental journey creates new opportunities, new risks, and it also requires different forms of leadership. So the problem is, when a leader applies the same type of leadership to an individual, regardless of where they are on their developmental journey, this is where we see team members who feel either dumped on, where a leader just gave them full responsibility for a task, but didn't actually walk them through the process of how to learn how to do the task the way that the leader wanted. So it was just dumped on them. Or they feel micromanaged because they are now in D3 or D4. They're gaining confidence and competence, but the leader is still looking over their shoulder, trying to hold on really tightly to the process and the outcomes. So talk to us about those two problems and where you've seen that kind of come up for leaders.
Yeah, those are the two classic errors that we as leaders make. And I say we because we all make these same mistakes.
Right.
We're either in a rush, we got things to do, we have our own responsibilities as leaders, and so we just kind of delegate out responsibilities to people and hope they figure it out. And it's essentially throwing people into the deep end and hoping they swim. And I'm not suggesting there's never a time and a place for that, but more often than not, it exposes people unnecessarily. It puts them in a position where they're less likely to win. They're going to go through their own D2 no matter what we think, and it's going to crush people. And I've seen so many people in different organizations who, as we say, get dumped on and get so overwhelmed they don't have the necessary support and partnership, and eventually either quit or are seen as unsuccessful by their leaders, when in fact it wasn't that individual's fault, it was the leader's fault. The other micromanaging is really the opposite. It's we've invested in our team members, we've given them responsibility, but again, we're looking over their shoulder, we're micromanaging, we're policing them, and we're all over them. They kind of feel like, gosh, you know what? I think I've learned this. Like, why are you constantly, questioning me or pushing back on me on something like that? And again, both are equally unhelpful. But here's the irony. it only happens when we as leaders don't understand those 4 stages of development, because each stage of development actually requires a different style of leadership. And the wonderful thing about these principles, this is not only applicable in the workplace, this is applicable in our marriages. When my wife is going through some, growth area in her life, and if I don't know how to show up for her based on the stage of growth that she's in, I may mean well. And I think all the leaders listening out there are going to say, I mean well, I'm trying my best, but meaning well and doing well are 2 very different things, right? We get kudos for meaning to do well and our motives are good. But if we provide the wrong leadership style for somebody, then it's actually counterproductive. And so today, what we want to do is unpack, in alignment with the 4 stages of development, what are the 4 styles of leadership that we can learn? All of us can learn these and apply, that are not only going to benefit leadership in the organizational space, but will radically transform how we show up for our loved ones, our family, our friends, and anybody else. Because again, how we show up for people in many ways determines whether we are a partner for them or whether we are unhelpful.
That's so good. Would you then just lead us in, like unpack for us the leadership square, with the understanding of where we came from with the development square in our last episode?
Absolutely. So if we take the development square, we're literally just going to layer what we call the leadership square on top of it. So as we talked about the first phase of development, we'll talk about the first style of leadership, and so on and so forth. Very simple, straightforward. Again, the first stage of development, right? We call the honeymoon phase. That's the unconscious incompetence. The leadership style in this phase is what we refer to as directive, or a modeling style of leadership. It's directive in the same way, when our kids are very young, they need clear instructions, they need clear expectations, they need clear boundaries and parameters in which they can operate. Part of it's because we want them to know what we expect of them. Part of it's because we want to protect them against unnecessary issues or challenges. And so we provide a very directive style of leadership. And I think for some of us, we can feel uncomfortable with this, because if we naturally just want to delegate everything out, we can feel like maybe we're being overbearing, maybe we're being, over too commanding, right? Because this sometimes will smack of the kind of command and control style of leadership that many people are trying to get away from nowadays. But it's more than directive leadership. It's a modeling style of leadership. Let me show you what it is that I'm wanting from you. Let me show you what I'm expecting of you. In the same way that when our kids are learning how to brush their teeth, we don't just send them in the bathroom to brush their teeth for the first time. We pick them up, put them on the counter, we show them in the mirror, look at how mommy or daddy brushes their teeth. And I know that sounds pedantic, but because human beings learn the same way at any stage of our life, we need to apply this modeling style leadership for people who are in that first phase. We need to not only give them a vision for what we want to see from them, but we need to show them what it is that we want from them. And by the way, showing does not mean we have to model it. Sometimes we train people through videos. We send them to conferences. We provide, onboarding processes, all of which are intended to not only tell, but to model what it is that we're asking of people and what we expect of them. Now, again, just like with our kids, unless we want to raise infants for the rest of our life, we've got to change our leadership style to help people move into the further, parts of the developmental process. So we move next into what we call L2, which is in alignment with D2, right? So D2 is all about people now needing to try their hand at something. They need to figure out what they do and don't know how to do. And this requires that we move into more of a coaching style of leadership. I've told you what I want. I've showed you what I want. Now I want you to try your hand at it. And I'm here to partner with you through what we call the 2 leadership energies of support and challenge, which, by the way, we covered in a previous episode. Please go back and review the Empower Matrix, because this is the stage where if we as leaders are not taking how we coach our team members seriously, we will largely default to one of those 2 energies, right? We'll either be very, very supportive and, and almost, we're coddling people at times, or we're all challenged. And now people get really discouraged because remember, they're already underwater in DT. They're already overwhelmed. They already feel like the temptations of I want to quit, or I'm going to look for greener pastures. But this is the phase where the deepest growth for those individuals is taking place. And so we need to embrace a coaching style of leadership where we provide support, we provide challenge. This is also going to require that we give more investment in terms of our time, our energy. And this is what I hear from leaders all the time. Ain't nobody got time for that. I've got my own responsibilities, leader. I don't have time to spend all this energy and resource with these individuals. Like, why can't they just figure it out? And I tell them, because that's not how humans work. So they need the coaching style of leadership to help them stay on track, to give them the best chance of persevering through that pit experience, to see that they come out on the other side. Now, eventually, when people move from D2 into D3, our leadership style again needs to change. And we move from a coaching to a supporting style of leadership, what we refer to as L3 leadership or supporting. Now, this is different to coaching. Here's why. Coaching style of leadership is very hands-on, it's very engaging, it's very involved. The supporting is less so. And this is where we as leaders sometimes miss the boat. And I'll use this illustration. I often say the problem with teenagers is not teenagers, it's the parents of teenagers. And here's what I mean by that. As our teenagers grow and develop and they start to get some confidence, they're going to want to explore their own ideas, their own convictions, their own taste in music, how they want to dress, what they do and don't want to do, how they want to spend their time, what they want to watch on TV, whatever the case is. It's a natural part of their individuation process. They're trying to grow up and move into adulthood, but we as parents sometimes freak out because we feel like we're losing control. We pull back the reins, and what ensues is a tug of war between the parent and the teenager. If we're not careful as leaders, we can do the same thing. As members of our team gain confidence as they move into D3, and they feel like they can take more initiative and take more responsibility and be more proactive. If we're not careful, sometimes we kind of stay overly involved or overly engaged. We kind of stay in that directive or coaching style leadership rather than loosening the reins and saying, hey, I'm going to give you a little bit more rope. Go out, figure this out, try things. You're going to fail. You're going to make mistakes. I'm here to support you. I'm here to encourage you. I'm here to remind you of what we've learned together, but I'm no longer here to constantly be looking over your shoulder and giving you advice at every turn. And so we, in some ways, got to start to let go in this third phase. And then eventually, as our team members move into D4, unconscious competence, that's where we need to move into what I call a delegating style of leadership. Now, let me make this clear. People say, but Eric, isn't the whole process delegation? Yes, but you're not really ready to delegate responsibility and authority to people in D4 until you've gone through all the other three processes first, right? And that's really, really important, because if we're not taking people through a process where they are ready to be fully delegated to, then it is most likely that we are simply dumping on people, right? And so let me just pause for a second and illustrate, go back to illustrating the dumping versus micromanaging effect. When we as leaders delegate out responsibility and authority to somebody to go do something that they have never done before or are not quite sure what to do, and we basically throw them in the deep end, that is called dumping. That's not delegating. That's dumping. It's unfair to that individual and will usually lead to negative consequences. In the reverse, or the opposite, when people have moved to D3 and D4, like you said earlier, but we're still providing a very directive and coaching style of leadership, guess what happens? They feel micromanaged. They feel distrusted. They feel like they maybe haven't grown as much as they should have grown. And so that's, now that we have the full leaderships of the full, all four styles of leadership, and that we can see it laid over the development square, now we can begin to understand and ask this simple question. Well, most of us are comfortable with one or two of these leadership styles. So what if I am not comfortable with the other two or three leadership styles? And some of us will default and will be experienced as micromanagers, and others of us will be experienced as dumpers.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us as leaders is to simply ask the question, what's my natural default, which is not a problem, but we need to be aware of that so that we can ask the question, how do I develop the other styles? And going back to our conversation around development, how do I identify appropriately where are my team members in any area of their developmental journey? And so that I can provide the most appropriate and helpful leadership style that will give them the best chance of continuing on their journey.
I love that. One of the things that I think is probably the trickiest part of this process, and I'd love your thoughts, is how do we know when it's time to shift leadership styles? Are there any markers that as a leader we can be looking at and saying, okay, I can kind of see we're on the cusp of D1, D2 or D2, D3 that will signal to us that we need to make a shift?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much I could say, but let me just give us a few thoughts for each transition point.
Yeah.
If somebody seems bored, disengaged, it's most likely because they're not feeling the challenge of learning or developing or growing into something new. And that should be a cue for us that we might need to create an opportunity for somebody in our team to grow and develop into some new area, which means we have to cast vision, which means that's what is going to get them into the first phase,
Mhm.
right, of the square. Um, the transition from D1 to D2 is usually marked by a sudden shift in attitude, mood, and disposition from that individual. Once they start getting a little snarky, sarcastic, they seem overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, you'll see this shift in their attitude. As leaders, we can get frustrated and say, hey, shape up or shape out or ship out, whatever it is.
Whatever that phrase is.
One of those. But reality is more often than not, that's a good indicator that that person is experiencing a D2 phase. And where we need to shift into a coaching style to say, okay, hold on, how do I engage with you? How do I give you the right support and challenge to partner you in this phase? Usually the shift from D2 to D3 is marked by somebody's growing confidence, and they will start to take more initiative. And rather than slapping their hand and saying, hey, I'm the boss, you shouldn't be initiating here or being proactive, we want to celebrate that. And we want to encourage them and say, I love that you're taking it. I love that you're bringing new ideas to the table. I love that you're wanting to take on more responsibility. And so that marks the shift from L2, that coaching style, to L3, which is more supporting. And then usually the shift from, L3 to L4, that those styles of leadership is marked as the individual's gotten to the point where when we as a leader, we need to ask ourselves this question: do I believe this person can do what I do as good as I do, if not better? Then it's time to shift into L4 and to say, you know what? I need to really fully delegate this responsibility to you. You're crushing it. I trust you. Of course, whenever you need to process, of course, if you need some guidance at any point, hit me up. But otherwise, I fully trust you. It's really interesting because this just hit me. And a great example of this is yesterday, you and I were supposed to be in a meeting together. And I suddenly realized, oh no, my schedule has a conflict. And you and I were supposed to be in a meeting with a client that normally I would take the lead on and facilitate. And I remember having to ask myself this question, like, do we need to reschedule the meeting, or do I believe Don could do this meeting as good as I could, if not better? And the answer for me was yes.
Hmm.
And so I remember communicating to you, and not perfectly, of course, but communicate. I was a little bit behind the eight ball on timing, but I communicate to you, hey, Don, you can handle this. I trust you. Have fun and tell me how it goes. Now, had you and I not worked so much together, and I had just suddenly thrown you into the deep end, like, if that would have been a deep end experience, that would have been unfair and that would have been dumping.
Yes.
Or if I had jumped into the call and never let you talk and I just controlled the whole meeting and conversation, that would have been micromanaging. But instead, I felt like, you know what? In a lot of areas of her coaching ability, Dawn is in D3 and D4. And this is a situation where I feel like I really believe she can do this as well, if not better than me. And so I'm going to delegate this to her. And it turns out that it turned out really well. But the only reason I could identify that moment yesterday for our listeners is because I have done my fair share of dumping and micromanaging.
Right.
I had to learn from those mistakes, so that now I'm much better at identifying where are my team members and how do I make sure I provide the right style of leadership.
Those are such helpful markers. I think that for our listeners might be one of the best takeaways from this episode, because it's one thing to know the different styles. It's a totally different thing to know when and how to make those necessary shifts. So thank you for kind of unpacking that for me a little bit. Okay, I would love now if you help us understand how the best leaders use the leadership square. Are there some examples from recent coaching experiences
Yeah,
that you can show us how this works in real time?
absolutely. So a great example, and I love these examples when I'm working with leaders who struggle on both sides of the conversation, right? Because it
Mhm.
just shows as humans, we're all having to figure this out. Nobody knows how to do this well until you practice and get better. But this one particular leader had two different team members, one that they were dumping on and one they were micromanaging simultaneously at the same time.
That's talent.
Yeah, it's a real gift. In the first situation with the person they were dumping on, they hired this very high level executive to join the team and who had a lot of experience and very intelligent, very skilled, and just kind of gave them this incredible responsibility to run this whole department. Here's the problem: as skilled and as competent and as capable and as intelligent and as amazing as this human being was, they come from a different company that had a radically different culture. Something we don't talk enough about, right? Because we hire for competence, we rarely think about culture. And so, unknowingly, this CEO of this company didn't realize they just dumped this responsibility onto this new team member. And this new team member, wanting to be impressive and wanting to show that they could handle it, kind of just went with it and didn't realize that they were in the deep end.
Yeah.
Not in terms of some of the specific skills that they needed, because they were well skilled. It was more in the terms that they didn't understand the cultural differences. And so a lot of their communication was getting lost in translation. They didn't know how this company operated, like this is how we do things. And so it was actually creating a lot of turmoil in their department.
Mhm.
And this CEO was asking, like, Eric, I don't understand. I thought we hired this amazing person. They're an A player and I don't know what's gone wrong and what did I do wrong? And I said, well, hey, listen, I'm just curious, when you delegated out this incredible responsibility to oversee one of the biggest departments in your organization, at any point did you like inquire whether, she might need some help or partnership in terms of she's coming into a radically different culture, right? Like anybody who's been married knows, like, you're inheriting a radically different culture in your spouse's family. And if we don't understand that, we kind of just assume that they do things and believe things and communicate things in the way that we do. And so there was a major culture clash. And he said, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I dumped on her. Now, compare and contrast that with another executive team member on the same team that is overseeing their finances, their CFO and the CEO. Because of a lot, they've made a lot of acquisitions and the company's grown a lot. But in that CEO's stress, like, they were questioning the CFO at every turn and challenging them and pushing back and running their own number, their own number simulations,
Yeah.
on their own free time. And they started calling their friends who were CFOs to ask, are they doing it right? And is this okay? And again, some of that stuff is okay, but what the CEO didn't realize is, out of their own fear and security stress, they were micromanaging their team member who was the CFO. And the CFO was getting really, really frustrated, was kind of trying to give them some feedback to let them know, like, hey, dude, like, you're stepping all over my toes. You're questioning me in meetings. You're challenging me at every turn. And the CEO was like, I don't understand. Like, as a CEO, I'm responsible for the lifeblood of this company, which is our cash flow and our finances and our financial projections. And I said, yes, 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 you are ultimately responsible. However, you are treading all over your CFO. and I think you're mishandling them, you're micromanaging them. He said, "Oh my gosh, you're right." And we dug into to understand why he was operating that way. But again, same company, same leader, but with one situation dumping, another situation micromanaging. And here's the beautiful thing about this story and any other story that I could share is once that he was willing to practice self-awareness and recognize, gosh,
Mhm.
I am operating in a way that's unhelpful to this particular team member, right? Because the temptation is to blame the team member. They don't know what they're doing. They can't figure it out. They suck. But
Mhm.
when a leader has humility to own, gosh, maybe it's something in me that needs to change. It's incredible how much growth that CEO experienced. It broadened his understanding of the leadership styles and what was necessary. One individual needed more directive, modeling, coaching style of leadership. The other one, the CFO, needed more supporting and delegating. And once the CEO understood and really started to practice these styles of leadership, number one, he became a more mature, more holistic, integrated leader. But the entire team benefited. And today, I can say, and again, not all stories end in success, but this one did. And today, that team is really functioning at a high level, flourishing because of that journey.
That's so interesting. What are some of the markers that you could point to, and maybe some of the pitfalls? Like, what's at stake for our listeners as leaders if they decide that they're not going to do that work? Like this individual that in the story you just shared, humility was at the core of them being able to recognize how their own learning and development had
Yeah.
caused two of their team members to stumble. And humility is not fun. It's not easy, especially as leaders. It can feel really, um, it can make us feel exposed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But what is at stake for our leaders if they are like, you know what, just buck up. This is how I lead.
This is me. Take it or leave it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've always done things this way. I mean, there's
Right.
heard it all. Let's do this. I'm no dog. I can't learn new tricks. This is just the way it's going to be. You know, Yeah. What's at stake is a dysfunctional, toxic, disempowering, disconnected, siloing, isolating environment, right? It's no different with our kids. Think about it this way. If when our kids are younger, we don't provide any clear direction, standards, expectations, boundaries, parameters, accountability, then our kids it's going to become, like not Lost Boys. That's one of my favorite movies. What's the other one? Gosh, I forget. Where all these kids are basically living savage lives on this island because
Lord of the
it was
Flies.
Lord
Yeah.
of the Flies. You're going to get a Lord of the Flies situation, right? You're going to raise kids who have little discipline, who basically think their way is the right way, who are most likely going to be entitled, and and quite frankly, over time, be unsuccessful. In the same way that when your kids enter their teen years and into their young adult years, if we're still trying to be overly controlling and overly directive, and then the tug of war will ensue, and will break trust and relationship, and we'll likely lose that relationship. And that's the same thing that happens in the workplace. People are in the first two stages of development, and we're not providing enough clear direction and support and partnership. Then they're going to feel discouraged, frustrated, and they're going to find their own way that will lead to undesirable results. And if our people are in the third and fourth phase of development, and we're still micromanaging them, then they're going to feel distrusted, frustrated, and probably leave. And so, what's at stake? Yeah, I mean, most of the companies we have the privilege of going into and working with, because none of us are perfect, and we're all having to learn and grow. And even the healthiest companies that we've worked with, we see these indicators in different spaces where people either feel dumped on or micromanaged. And what that does ultimately is it leads to distrust and a failure of relationship, and people will either silently quit or leave. Those are usually the two outcomes.
Yeah. That's good. Okay. Given that, then let's dig into some practicalities. How, if I'm a leader that is wanting to put this tool into practice, what are a few things that I can do this week that are going to move the needle for my own learning when it comes to the leadership square?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, it's really important that we have a basic understanding of the 4 stages of development first, right? So again, if our listeners haven't heard that previous episode, go back, listen to it, because in the same way, if we can't identify where we are at in our developmental journey, we cannot give ourselves the support and permission to be on that journey. And so that usually leads to self-condemnation, judgment, or letting ourselves off the hook. In the same way, if we're not able to recognize where other people are at on their developmental journey, then we don't have a chance at providing the correct style of leadership. So my encouragement will be just a simple, practical exercise. This could be with our kids, it could be with our spouse, it could be with our friends, it could be with our team members, our employees, is to just take 2 or 3 people that we feel like we have some responsibility in their life and to simply ask the question, where are they at on the square in terms of their developmental journey? And again, this could be any specific area of their developmental journey, any area they're growing in. Say, where are they? Where do I think they are based on the indicators we've learned about the development square? And then to simply ask this question, what kind of style of leadership am I currently providing? And does it align with the leadership styles that we've just learned? Right? Because we're likely engaging them in some way, shape, or form, but we've got to first pay attention to how am I engaging this person? And does it accord with the leadership style that's appropriate for that stage of their developmental journey? Again, which requires a little bit of self-awareness, some humility to recognize that sometimes we're not. Like the number of times that my wife, who is, the voice of wisdom in my life, who constantly reminds me, how is it that you teach this stuff so often, but you still struggle to practice it? I'm like, I'm a human being, dang it, okay? But the reality is the number of times where she has to kind of bring to my attention, hey, with whether it's our daughter or son, like, they're in this kind of stage of their journey of growth in some, it could be in a sport, it could be in relationships, it could be in dealing with significant others, it could be in dealing with their teachers, it could deal with coaches, doesn't matter. And my wife will say, hey, listen, I think they're in this stage of development, but you're providing a different style of leadership. Right. And more often than not with my kids, my temptation is because I'm much more comfortable on the delegating side of engagement. Like I just want to be like, yeah, figure it, it'll be fine. Take a risk. It'll be okay. You'll learn along the way, which is not terrible because that is appropriate at some level. But I have often failed to see the opportunities where my kids need a more coaching or supporting style of leadership.
Yeah.
And in the reverse, the number of times where I've kind of said, tried to control my kids and tried to tell them what they should think or do or be or, whatever. You've done that as well, right? And so again, our listeners, you're not alone. This is stuff that we have to learn and practice to get better. That would be the first thing. Like I pick a few people, identify where are they at in an area of their developmental journey, and what style of leadership am I or should I be practicing with that individual. And then here's the thing that I would strongly encourage as a second point of application. If that individual is old enough and, in other words, not a small child, and there's enough trust in the relationship, it's worth even sharing this, learning with that individual to say, hey, listen, it seems like you might be in this stage of your developmental journey in this area. Do you resonate with that? And I want to learn how to partner with you more effectively. So with this style of leadership, do you think it would be helpful based on where you're at? And that oftentimes just that feedback can be really powerful and helpful as we learn how to lead better. And I tell people all the time, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been coaching people for this in a long time. However, I'm still constantly with you, with other team members at Empower Coaching or with my clients. Oftentimes I'm seeking the feedback. It seems like you're in this stage of development. Do you resonate with that? Is that accurate? And am I providing the kind of leadership that's been helping you in this phase? And again, it requires a little bit of self-awareness, a little bit of humility. But the number of times somebody has said, actually, I don't think I'm in that stage. And no, I don't think you're providing. I'm like, oh, okay. It doesn't mean they're right. It just means it gives me a chance to step back, reflect, and ask the question, how do I most effectively lead? Or the word I like to say better is partner with somebody in their growth journey.
Yeah. And I think for me, the biggest takeaway that I always am reintegrating from these two tools, the development square and the leadership square, is that it is not one size fits all. I can't do one thing across the board as a leader and expect to see the results that I want. And as a learner, I can't just expect myself to be an expert when I haven't gone through the development square. So for our listeners,
Yes.
if you are loving this toolkit, which we refer to as our leadership operating system, then I don't want you to miss what's coming next. So make sure you're subscribed, because our next episode, we are digging into a tool that addresses one of the biggest challenges that organizations face. And we even touched on it earlier in this episode, which is our leadership pipeline. It is the tool that helps you tackle how to find, train, and keep qualified people on your team. And when we talk to teams and leaders, this is one of the biggest struggles that they often face, is how to do this. So our next episode on the leadership pipeline, we are going to dig into this. Eric will unpack that tool for us. And as I just want to remind you that somebody probably came to mind, another leader, another partner, another person on their journey came to mind when you were listening to this episode. And we'd love if you'd share it with them, because there's nothing more powerful than helping somebody grow into the leader that they were meant to be. And this episode could be really transformational. As always, we love that you are here learning and growing alongside us.